Hello and welcome to Sex, Love, and Soul. I'm Mary Knight. Happy New Year! Because of popular demand, I'm continuing to share my stories of when I started off as a sex worker. What follows after this introduction is actually an audio that I recorded about a year and a half ago for a podcast. And it actually is more raw, a little graphic than what I have been sharing. And it was because it was an audio. And in audio, being behind a microphone instead of in front of a camera, because I am a new YouTuber, I am new at this whole video thing, it is often, not often, it's always easier for me to be a little more, I don't know, raw and personal, just because I feel like there's that barrier between us. I don't feel quite so exposed. So I know that y'all are going to enjoy that video. I mean, the audio that's going to follow this. These stories aren't just about my recounting memories. They involve sometimes a lot of emotion for me and a lot of different insights. And they kind of branch off into different areas of my thoughts and my experiences. And so sometimes, even though my intention is to stay on a particular topic, it brings up stuff. And so then I start talking about it. I'm talking about the nuances of responding to kind of come-ons that I would get from men out in public and how I didn't always know how to respond. And I know that that's true for a lot of women. And so I know sometimes a woman could come off as being a giant bitch when you hit on her or you approach her, and you might think that it's because she thinks that she's better than you are or you're not good enough. Sure, that could be true in some cases, but I know for me and other women that it's a defense mechanism because we don't know how to respond, because we weren't taught how to respond to unwanted attention or to just attention from men that maybe we felt neutral about. And so that's one of the reasons that I felt so free in the club, even though I didn't really enjoy working in the club after a while. I felt free in there because it was okay that men were coming up and hitting on me. That's what was supposed to be happening. It was okay if a man was staring at my boobs. I didn't have to feel angry or afraid like I would out in public. I didn't understand this before, but now I know, oh, that's why a lot of men like the strip club too, is because you're just allowed to gawk. You're allowed to proposition. It's expected, it's wanted. That's how that whole thing works. And so there is this wonderful sense of freedom in a club, in a swingers club, that you just don't get out in the world because so many of us women, we're not taught how to respond to men in a way that leaves everyone with their dignity. So I'll get into that. If you have not subscribed to my channel yet, why not? Do it. It's easy. It's free. And you're probably going to learn something. Also, check out my show notes for a book I have for sale, How to Turn Nice into Your Sexy Superpower. And I have another book coming out all about confidence. Also, check my show notes for my other offerings. Okay, enjoy. Hello, and welcome to Sex, Love, and Soul. I'm your host, Mary Knight. I think I've mentioned that I was 34 when I got into sex work, and I had never even been inside of a strip club, ever. But by that time, I'd been divorced twice. I had all kinds of sex. I was a wild punk rock teenager in Houston, Texas. I was going to my first shows in 1980 when I was 15, and it was a really rough scene. And I loved it. I thought it was so exciting. I was 5'11", so I was very tall, and I looked like an adult. And I seemed worldly, and maybe I was when I was navigating the punk rock scene, but not when it came to sex and love and romance. I didn't have sex for the first time until I was a month shy of my 17th birthday, so that was 1982. And that was pretty late by the standards of that time and compared to my friends. But that was me. I was always kind of a late bloomer. So even though I was this punk rock kid with a tattoo, I was pretty innocent. I had this outward appearance as somebody wild, and I was, in my own way, this very wild adventurer. But that didn't mean that I knew anything about titty bars. So the very first time that I stepped foot in a strip club was when I was going there for a job interview as a waitress. Here I am walking into the front door of this place called the Trophy Club. And it was in this North Houston neighborhood. And it's not there anymore. I went from waitressing to stripping. And I was now reminiscing on how much I just fucking hated working at that club. It was exhilarating when I went in for the first time. It was an overwhelming and shocking experience because I had never been in an environment like that where topless women were strutting around, confident, flirty. Some were giving lap dances, rubbing their topless bodies on all these different men. A beautiful woman was dancing around seductively on stage. And I had to walk through the club to get to the manager's office for the interview. So I was in the center of all this action. I could feel my brain kind of short-circuiting just with this overload of sexual stimuli. And I had this involuntary sexual response. I felt myself get wet, but I wasn't necessarily turned on. I was overwhelmed, and my body had this unexpected visceral response, and it was a mixture of excitement and confusion. And this is coming from a 34-year-old woman who had 3 kids and multiple sex partners by this time. This experience was so intense that it was a little off-putting. But I thought, well, I guess I can work here because I needed the money. And once I got the job and started work, it took me a few days to get used to seeing other women walking around topless and in G-strings and just looking at all these other women's naked bodies and watching how the men were responding to them. And I was witnessing activities that would typically be private, sexual things. They were happening in front of me, just out in the open. And it amazes me how quickly that I got used to that environment. And I was also getting desensitized to the idea of participating in these kinds of activities with strangers and for money. And after several weeks, I went from the Trophy Club to working for an escort service as a private dancer. And just like the name sounds, a private dancer meant that I was meeting men in their private hotel rooms or homes and giving them lap dances there or giving them rub downs. And then eventually, after a few months, I was giving hand jobs. And I felt very safe in these men's homes and hotel rooms. I felt much safer than I felt in the strip club. And I shouldn't have felt safer alone, naked, with a naked man in his house or in his hotel room. I should not have felt safer there than in a public place. But I did because my fear and shame of being found out that I was doing this stripping and all this dirty stuff in a strip club, the fear and shame of that was more potent than my fear for my own safety. And that's interesting. That's always been really interesting to me. And it just shows you how it is our thoughts, not our outer circumstances, that create feelings of safety and security. Because it's completely irrational that I would feel safer in a stranger's home. I mean, how did I know that he was the only one there? It's just so weird thinking back. But I chose to be naive back then. I chose to not admit to myself how potentially dangerous what I was doing actually was. One of the things that I came to love about working in a strip club was feeling relaxed and free. Men would look at me, they would stare at me, really, and it was okay. I didn't have to feel uncomfortable that a man was looking at my boobs, because in the club, that's what was supposed to happen. When it occurred, say, in the grocery store, at the gym, walking my dog, just walking down the street, it felt terrible. Men would come up to me and try to talk to me, try to get my phone number, flirt, make comments about my body or my clothes, whatever. And even well into my 40s, that felt awkward to me because I thought, come on, man, I'm just trying to buy some jeans. I'm just waiting in line for a sandwich. Come on. I didn't mind being admired, but in some situations it felt uncomfortable. And it was because I didn't want to be rude. I knew how to shut someone down who was being an asshole, but I didn't know how to turn a man down gently. I have that skill now. And now that I'm older, it doesn't happen to me that every time I leave the house, someone's trying to get my attention like it used to. So now that I have the skill, I don't need to use it. But I remember feeling so relieved when I was working at the strip club because I was walking around in this dress with my butt hanging out, and then I'm getting on stage and taking off my dress, and I'm in the tiniest little G-string that you ever saw, and 6-inch heels and nothing else. And I'm dancing around, and men are looking at me, and they're supposed to look at me. I wanted their attention. I wanted men to leer at me. I wanted them to proposition me. That was the deal. And because of that, in the club, I felt free. Because there's a lot of pressure on a woman to be out in the world and have all this attention on you. And you need to know what to do about it. And I didn't know what to do. No one taught me what to do with unwanted attention from men. I remember I was very young, like 13, maybe 14. And as I mentioned, I was very tall, so people thought that I was older than I was. And I remember a man flirting with me, like a grown man. And I was terrified. I had no idea what to do. He was nice, and he wasn't being a creep. He was just being flirty and kind of making some moves on me. And I'm pretty sure he didn't know that I was 13. When we were walking away, my mom I remember her whisper screaming at me. She got really mad at me, and she was scolding me for somehow enticing this man. My mom accused me of causing that man to come on to me. And I felt like I couldn't fucking win. Because the only thing that I was ever taught was to be polite, right? Be respectful to adults. I was supposed to be a good girl and not enticing. But when a man is enticed by me, I'm supposed to do what? Be respectful and courteous? Where does that leave me as far as the appropriate action to take? And if I hadn't been terrified by what was going on, I would have said, hey man, I'm 13. And he probably would have just shrunk away. But I would never have said anything like that if I thought it might embarrass him, because I didn't have that kind of poise. And from my mom's reaction, you can imagine that I didn't feel that I could go to her for any advice. And most of my life was spent desperately wanting a boyfriend, but afraid of what might happen when I did get one. And if our parents didn't teach us this at home, then we go out into the world and we're trained to be nice, friendly, polite, to smile, to be pleasant, to look pretty, be attractive, look feminine, and all this kind of stuff. And that's the only thing that we're taught. And I agree with being respectful and kind and feminine. I'm not saying that, but what are we supposed to do when that's our only option? We're not supposed to bristle at unwanted sexual attention, and we're not supposed to give in to it either. And this is why I felt free in highly sexualized environments, because that's what was supposed to happen in there. I didn't have to feel bad about not saying no. When a man was coming on to me in the club, I knew how I was supposed to respond. I was at ease in sex work because it was for somebody like me, where I didn't have good boundaries. I never had to worry about offending anyone or being uncomfortable when a man leered at me in the club. I had really shitty boundaries until I was in my 40s. And it was sex work that taught me all about boundaries. A lot of times people that have poor sexual boundaries or poor personal boundaries, it was because they were sexually abused. And I don't have that in my history. And I know a lot of people think that about sex workers, like, oh, you know, that all of us have been sexually abused, but not all of us. There are other things that go on that can contribute to being a professional criminal. I'm just sharing my own experiences. I was not coming from a healthy, empowered place when I got into sex work. Once I was in it, that is where I learned about what it means to be a woman and what I can expect from men, and in the positive. I'd already experienced so many terrible things with men and just stupid ass dumb relationships with men, that it wasn't until I was an escort that I experienced some really great relationships with men. So how about that? But anyhow, talking about boundaries, you can tell from what I told you about my mom. And I love my mom, and I'm not in any way just trying to, talk shit on her. But that was her reaction for a lot of things that happened with me. And I know now it was because she was extremely uncomfortable with what was happening and didn't know what to do and didn't know what to tell me or to tell that man or anything. And so instead, she reacted by just being really ashamed and embarrassed about that happened. And I think that she was embarrassed for me is what that's the way I'm thinking of it now, but because it makes it sound like she's this really terrible person. But I really thought that situation, that I had done something wrong, but all I was doing was standing there in Foley's in the ladies department by some jeans, and this grown-ass man comes over to me and starts flirting with me. So what? So just by my very existence in the world, I got in trouble. But at the time, I wasn't mad at my mom. I was upset with myself. And so I was very uncomfortable with attention from men and boys, which, because I was an attractive young girl, I got a lot of it. So it made life in many instances just kind of unfun. But anyhow, so I brought up the thing about the boundaries, and my mom was mentally ill. So it took me, I had a difficult time. I didn't have any guidance. I'm just going to leave it at that for now. I didn't have any guidance. I didn't have anybody I could go to and go, hey, mom, this happened. What do I do? So I just kept a lot of stuff to myself because I thought that asking questions about things made people uncomfortable and that I would get in trouble. So I just I was a very experiential learner, and I left home at an early age. I left home at 16. All right. And so then once I started escorting, and I became a high-end escort where I was going out in public on dates with guys. I was comfortable to be in situations with clients where I'm out with this man and we're meeting for drinks, and then we're going back to his place, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. There was none of this, oh, is this the night? I don't know. Am I supposed to be having sex? Am I ready for sex? Is it too soon? Is it too late? None of that was present when I was working as an escort because I had a very clear set of boundaries, and I was in charge because it was my business, right? I had rules, I had boundaries, I had standards for everything. And it was also spelled out on my website. And I think I called it my rules of etiquette. And it was like, this is what I expect from you, and this is what you can expect from me. And of course, it was all this veiled language that didn't mention sex or sexual activities at all, but it was implied. And men, technically, they paid me for my time and companionship, not for sex. And these obvious boundaries that I had were written on my website in black and white. But everything was perfectly laid out, and I loved it. There was a structure, there was a plan. It was like clockwork. And if somebody did something I really didn't like, I would leave with the money and all, because I was like, hey, fuck you, buddy. You know the rules. There's no mystery here. And the thing that I loved was I knew what was expected of me. He knew what was expected of him. And it made the evening just so lovely. And our time together flowed. I felt very relaxed, and it allowed me to be present with the man and not worry about what would or wouldn't be happening later. Because I didn't think that I should be dating at all because I was a sex worker. So anyone that I was ending up with was not a conscious, rational, well thought out choice. It was always by default because I didn't take dating seriously. I didn't have any standards. Let me say it this way. I didn't have any yeses or nos, right? And because of that, because I was, I'm not dating anyway, but I would always end up dating somebody. And because I didn't have a plan, I didn't have rules, I wasn't choosing people, people were choosing me. that's a sucky way to live, because then I wasn't making any choices. And I'm, again, like I said, I'm ending up in these relationships by default. And I had the power and the option to choose. And instead, I refused to create boundaries. And because of that, I didn't give myself that choice or that power. And reflecting back, I'm not sure that I really knew that I had that power. I think I was still operating under that whole idea that the relationship stuff was up to the man, that the choosing was completely up to the man. And what I wanted mattered, but it wasn't like I could ever create that or really choose that. I just had to wait for the right man to come along. That to me sounds a little bit like spiritual bypassing, leaving it up to God or destiny or fate that the right man is just going to come along. And that's something that I love talking about, because it annoys me when people do that, when people blame God or the universe or source for their relationship. But I'll talk about that another time. One of the things I think that I was afraid of in creating boundaries or standards for dating and is that I was afraid that things were going to be too predictable, and with that predictability, things were going to get stale and be unfun and not spontaneous, and that things would just get really dull and boring if things were too predictable. And that's what I equated boundaries with and standards with, were, that's just being a stiff. What about spontaneity? What about fun? And it wasn't until later on, like I talked about through sex work, that I learned that boundaries actually make things fun. Just because something is predictable, or mostly predictable, I could say, because just because you have boundaries and standards and an idea how you want your dates to go, that doesn't mean that it's going to be stale. And all predictability, I mean, there's different levels of predictability, and just because something is predictable doesn't mean it's boring. It actually allows you a freedom that you've probably never experienced with men. But I'll go into that more next time. Okay, I hope this was helpful. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.